Hey, Tom here from the Run Testers. It's been over a month now since we did our first look at the Polar Grit X outdoor watch. And in that time, all four of the Run Testers have been using it across hundreds of miles of testing, from hill training, ultra running, road racing and just general fitness, to see how it compares with the other watches and fitness trackers out there at the moment. Let's take a look at the verdict. Okay, so first let's take a look at the specs. The price is £379 or $430. It comes in at 65 grams. Battery life is stated as being 40 hours in training mode, that's GPS and wrist-based heart rate monitoring, and 7 days in watch mode with continuous heart rate monitoring. Outdoor sensors include GPS, GLONASS, Galileo and QZSS. And the screen resolution is 240 pixels by 240 pixels.
So we're going to dive into kind of the key new features on the Grit X in more detail kind of individually, but first is kind of a quick run through of what you get on the watch that you'd kind of expect from a Polar multisport watch. It's got Polar's Precision Prime optical heart rate monitor on the back there, which is a pretty decent wrist heart rate monitor. It's got GPS and GLONASS, access to those satellites for kind of accurate distance tracking when you're outside. You can obviously use it with the Polar Flow app and web app, which gives you a little bit more detail. The watch itself gives you a fair amount of detail on kind of your recovery time and your training load. There are obviously insane amount of sports modes, like 130 of them, so whatever sport you prefer, you can track it with this watch and kind of customize the stats you see. When it comes to those stats, with running you get all the kind of usual stuff like cadence, but also running power directly from the wrist, which is something that's quite special to Polar, the Grit X and the Vantage V at the moment. Most watches you have to link up a foot pod to get power. You also get activity tracking, you get your steps and your calories tracked if you're into that, and sleep tracking, which Polar is currently really good at. It's like probably Polar, Fitbit and Huawei are the kind of the best in terms of sleep tracking at the moment, I'd say, in terms of what you get from a fitness tracker or a smartwatch. You will also get phone notifications direct to the watch. These aren't very good and we kind of turn them off. It's not really as kind of rich in detail as you get from a smartwatch. But you do get weather alerts on this watch, which can be helpful if you're trying to plan kind of a run and you want to avoid showers, for example.
It's a nice looking watch and it does a really good job at developing Polar's existing style of watch design and making it work for an outdoor watch. We all thought that Polar had done a really good job in developing their existing style into the outdoor market. It's lightweight, it is really comfortable to wear. In comparison to something like the Fenix 6X, it's a lot lighter, and which makes it great for running. So it is generally a really nice, comfortable watch to wear. Although Kieran did have a problem in the strap broke the first time he tried it. Tested over 10 hours of running and day wear. That 64 grams build actually makes a nice difference when you're running. It's heavier than the Forerunner 945, which comes in at about 50 grams. But when compared with something like the Fenix 6 Pro, which sits at 83 grams, it's noticeably lighter, and that makes a big difference when you're running in it because you don't really notice it. It's not bulky on your arm. The button design and control is great. The feel of them is really nice. There was an issue that we've raised before about the Polar Vantage V having quite stiff buttons. That's rectified with this, so it feels a lot nicer and easier to use. Usability in terms of the interface and the button system is fine. Polar's interface is actually quite an intuitive system. It's different than Garmin, but it's on a par with it. Once you get used to it, it's actually really easy to use and it's really logical. One thing we all agreed on was that the touchscreen isn't quite up to scratch, and this is something that some of us have seen with the other Polar devices, that it's not easy enough to use. There's a bit of lag, and certainly I opted to use the buttons more than the touchscreen in pretty much every use case. The touchscreen on an outdoor watch isn't really necessary. Something like the Fenix Pro doesn't even have one, and that's not an issue with it at all. The Chorus Apex Pro, that does have a touchscreen, but it's very limited and only used for a couple of features, so it really doesn't need one anyway. While we're talking about the screen, we found the brightness was fine in pretty much every condition, so no issues there. We would have liked the option to invert the screen between black and white and white and black screen options. Information during and post running is really nice and easy to use, and no issues with that at all. And you get a lot of detail. The screen size and the information that comes on it is perfect, and it gives you everything you need to know across pre, post and during running. You can also customize your running screens as well as your training views, which is a really nice feature, but you can only do this in the Polar Flow app and on the Polar website, and you can't actually edit it in the watch itself, which is a little bit annoying.
So when it comes to battery life, the Polar Grit X offers 7 days between charges, and that's with 40 hours of full GPS tracking, extendable up to 100 hours with low power GPS tracking mode. Now in our test, when we first put it up, we found we were way off the 7 days. We were getting more like 4.5, but we fixed that by doing a factory reset. Now, once you do a factory reset, you can do that very simply. You will get the 7 days plus actually, and that puts it up there with something like a Fenix 6. It's really, really good and solid on battery life. In the activity as well, we found it to be really reliable. 40 hours seemed to be a good stat for that. So while we didn't really get to test that 100-hour ultra endurance mode, we did actually put the full GPS through a test. We ran for 9.5 hours. It's about 45 miles. We did it against the Garmin Fenix 6. And the Polar Grit X dropped from 100% down to about 71. The Fenix 6 Pro dropped to 69%. So it was a pretty good match on the full power GPS mode for the Fenix 6. And overall battery life with the Polar Grit was really solid.
So when it comes to heart rate tracking, I kind of think we all had a fairly similar experience, which was the Grit X is pretty good, but still not perfect or even really reliable enough to use it as your main heart rate monitor. That's partly because there are so many really good features on the watch that need heart rate. So in terms of your training load or fueling, all that kind of stuff, you need a really accurate heart rate, and this isn't quite there. It often would spike at the start of a run and then come down and kind of be back in line with a chest strap, and then it will often lag behind if you're doing a quick interval or a burst up a hill or something like that. It will take a little bit time to catch up on the way up and a little bit of time to catch up on the way back down. So we've tested it kind of against other watches, and we've all done, wearing chest straps as well, things like the Polar H10, the Polar H9, the new Wahoo kind of ticker chest straps. And yeah, there's kind of the experience we had across the board. It's fine, and I probably wouldn't be too against just using it on easy run, but even then, all that data is feeding into the kind of really advanced training analysis stuff you get from Polar, so it's really worth wearing a chest strap, I think, to get the absolute most out of that.
So my thoughts on the heart rate monitor. Now, it's definitely not the worst that I've used. Pair it up with the chest strap and you are going to get the most accurate and reliable results, especially when so many features feed into the heart rate. But if you're not using a chest strap, apart from a few kind of spikes, that kind of, skew some of the data, generally it was fine and kind of settled down in kind of runs, in the kind of even tempo runs and the high intensity stuff. And then it was okay. But if I was to use it, long term, I would definitely grab a Polar chest strap or something that works, that's compatible with it, and you will get more reliable data. And get the most out of those insights that are based around heart rate information.
It actually delivered really well against the Stride FootPod, and better in most cases when we tested against devices like the Fenix 6X or the Instinct. When testing against the Polar Vantage V, we did find that it did take slightly longer to pick up a GPS signal, but only by about 15 seconds or so.
GPS performance is nothing, I didn't have any real issues with that, and that's very basics that you want to see from a running watch. Signal pickup was really quick. I was running with it against the Fenix and a couple of other Garmin watches, and generally the distance information, the tracking information was reliable. So from a GPS point of view, no real issues there. Even on those kind of trickier, more testing, challenging routes, especially when you're kind of going to areas, kind of trail areas where it's a bit more challenging to kind of pick up that information reliably. The Grit X did a really good job, and no real kind of qualms or issues from a GPS tracking point of view.
So the Polar Grit X comes with a tie-up with Komoot. Now Komoot is basically a route planning service, something a bit like Strava routes or the route planning that you get on Garmin Connect. Only actually I personally think it's a little bit better than that. You can basically go online, map out a route, it will tell you miles, it will give you a breakdown of all the kind of different types of terrain that you're going to meet in that route, and then you can fire it over, sync it to your watch via Polar Flow. Now what that'll do is then put turn-by-turn navigation on your wrist on the Grit X. Now initial setup with Komoot is a bit fiddly, making it speak to Polar was a little bit clunky and chunky and hard to do. But once you're through that, it's actually a fairly useful service that seems to grow on me. Now the service itself doesn't really break new ground when it comes to navigation. Plenty of what you're getting here is available in other ways. Komoot is actually available on Garmin and other devices. So no brand new ground being broken here. But it is a pretty good service to have, and I would argue that it's actually up there with any other navigation route planning tools that you can get. It's particularly good at looking at off-road, off the beaten track into trails. So if you're looking to do something like that, then this is really where Komoot might come into its own. One big irritation that we all found here is that Komoot works on a location basis, so you get a designated area for free that you can create maps within. If you want to step outside of that area, you have to pay a subscription. That doesn't come as part of the Polar deal. So if you are going to go and explore the world and go and run trails elsewhere, when we can finally do that, you're going to have to pay to go outside your designated zone. Seems like a little bit of a frustration really for a watch that's supposed to be for adventure. So on the wrist, the turn-by-turn is better than basic breadcrumb navigation, but it could easily be improved by having maps. Though I spoke to Polar and they told me there's a big trade-off here between the price that you're paying and access to all of that, battery life, and the need for it. So basically you're making a compromise here by not having maps. So in practice we found the turn-by-turn worked really well, it's reliable, and it particularly did well at picking up some forest trails that had been cut by animals rather than were actually proper paths. So when you go right off the beaten track, actually it's really good at still keeping you going where you want to go. And also, interestingly, it often navigated us to places that we might not have run before, so it was a good tool for discovery too. And the syncing with Komoot makes it really easy actually to save those routes that you've run before, sync them back to Komoot, and you can store all of those in a nice library. If you want to go back and revisit runs or share them with friends, that is something that becomes very easy to do with this. It's worth noting that the mid-run stats that you get with the Polar Grit X and Komoot are fairly basic. And actually the implementation on a Garmin watch of Komoot gives you far more detail. So you'll get things like an elevation map on your watch on the Garmin Fenix 6 Pro, and you'll also get things like estimated time to destination, which is really, really helpful while you're out there. You don't get that with the Polar Grit X. It is very, very basic in terms of the stats that you get from it, and that seems to be a bit of a shame. So another big headline feature on the Grit X is Fuelwise. Now Fuelwise goes way beyond the kind of usual time-based alerts that you'll get from something like the Garmin and the Coros, which helps you understand when to eat when you're doing a big feat of endurance. So instead, Fuelwise uses the real-time intensity of your effort, along with things like gender, height, weight, and your past training record, to give you recommendations of when to eat during a feat of endurance in the moment. So in preparation for your event, you need to tell the Grit a few things. You need to tell it the duration of the event you're about to do, the estimated intensity you're thinking you're going to run at based on your own heart rate zone, and also the size in grams of your preferred kind of carb portions. And what the Grit does is then it calculates and spits out your total estimated carb needs for the entire effort and the number of what I call kind of feed portions. And it's an excellent help actually when you're preparing how much food you're going to need to put in your pack. So during your run, Fuelwise will then beep on the watch, almost like a split alert to tell you when it thinks you need to eat and to drink. It only really kicks in for endurance efforts of 90 minutes or more, and essentially that's really all you need. All of that stuff before should be handled by your existing kind of glycogen stores. It also offers very simple kind of hydration alerts. These are just sort of time-based hydration alerts. They're not based on sort of trying to read whether or not you're hydrated under your skin, but they are very useful. So Fuelwise was one of the features that actually had all the run testers in agreement. We really like this feature. It's kind of easy to set up, it was very clear in terms of the information, and it was very, very easy to use, and it was super helpful. It's also a feature that kind of breaks new ground, and a really, really interesting thing that we've been wanting to see for quite a while in terms of helping us fuel. Now, I tested this out on a 45-mile ultra run, 9.5 hours. It was brilliant actually for getting me to focus in on my food preparation, to know what I was going to need to put in my pack, and also the portion size. And then actually when I was out on the run, I thought it was going to be fairly rudimentary, just giving me updates fairly incrementally, but actually it didn't. The time between feeds did change quite a lot. And often I found that Fuelwise hit me at times that during other ultras that I maybe wouldn't normally eat. And what that led to actually was that I had one of the most even fueled runs that I've had in an ultra ever. I had no bonking, no GI issues, and I found this feature to be really compelling as a result of that. And having said that, I don't think this is just for ultra runners either. I think this could be a really interesting feature for marathon runners who are looking to work out a little bit better their fueling strategies to get them across to 6.2. And even in training, looking on your long runs and your short runs, getting an idea about how you're fueling and the kind of things that you're using in terms of your fueling system, I think is a really, really useful piece of extra insight that only the Polar Grit X offers. Now, there were a couple of areas that we would have liked to see improvements on. One of them is that we would like to actually have to be forced to acknowledge when we've had a feed when we're out on a run. The alert, which is a vibration much like a split, actually, because it feels like a split, once your head goes and you've been in an ultra a long time, it becomes sort of slightly easy to miss. So we'd like to actually be forced to acknowledge it. We'd also like to see in the post-run stats a report of all the feeds that we have acknowledged and when we've eaten at what times during our run. It would be really useful post-run information. Also having some of that on the watch at the same time, so you can sort of flick to a screen and see when your last feed was, how many feeds you've taken, all of those kind of things, because deep into an ultra, these things can get lost, and having the extra information to support would be really, really handy. So overall, Fuelwise is one of the features actually that really, there isn't anything like this out there on the market, and it really kind of sells this watch. It's a really standout feature I think Polar have done very well with.
So Fuelwise is another kind of big feature for the Grit X, and there's a feature I think I would buy this watch for above all, of all things. I wasn't really kind of in a right level of fitness to kind of test it to its fullest, but I think the way it works, the concept of it, there's nothing else like it at the moment on a watch. And the fact that Polar have managed to get it to work and work as well, and just easy to set up, I think is the big thing for me. That support, that that you can kind of be more, you can manage your fuel, whether it's racing or just out running, for hours on end. It looks great on the watch, it's easy to set up, and I'm interested to see how that evolves as a feature on the Grit X, and how they can make it smarter and ultimately more useful and more valuable to use when you're out running.
So Hill Splitter is one of the new features that we all kind of felt didn't live up to what we were hoping it was going to be. It's basically just a screen on your run that automatically picks up when you're on a climb, and then it kind of tells you how fast you're moving on that climb. Now, that's okay, but it's hard not to compare it with something like Garmin's Climb Pro, which is a lot more advanced. Admittedly, you do have to enter a route to get to use Garmin's Climb Pro, but once you do, you get a whole host of more data, including like how much time, how much elevation you have left on the individual climb you're on, how much climbing you have left to do in your run overall, and also the Garmin's will automatically jump to Climb Pro when you hit a climb, so you just have to turn your wrist and all the stats are there, whereas you do have to navigate to the Hill Splitter screen to kind of get those stats on this watch. So I guess the kind of reason it's not great is because you don't know how much of a climb is left, you don't really know how to pace your efforts, you just see your pace, which doesn't really give a great indication of how you're working on hills. It'd be really good to be able to customize that page to show your heart rate or even power. I mean, this has power from the wrist. If you're using that to gauge your effort, it'd be really handy to have that on the Hill Splitter screen. So it kind of ends up being a very blunt tool in a way, and often lags. It takes a while for it to pick up the hill you're on, so you might almost be at the top before it even recognizes that you are going uphill. I also found, and so a couple of other guys, that when you look in the app afterwards to kind of see your hill splits broken down, they don't measure up. If you do an out and back run, there'll be more downhill than uphill or something like that, which obviously doesn't make any sense. And in general, it's not all that useful, I think, for what this is designed to be, like an outdoor watch. If you're out on a huge mountainous course or running loads of trails, just seeing your pace on the climb you happen to be on isn't that useful. Like, your heart rate would be more useful, I think, so you can try and keep it low if you're gauging your effort. Or, you want to know how much meters are left, how many meters are left on that climb. So maybe if it could link to Komoot on the route, then it'd be more useful. The one thing it probably can be used for is if you're if you're a road runner just going to a hill near you to do a hill rep session, it will automatically track those reps, and then afterwards you kind of look at them. Although I will say, as a road runner who does that, I never really bother to look at my climbs afterwards. All I'm doing on that session is trying to build some strength in my legs. I don't really need to see the pace on them. So yeah, at the moment it's a bit of a blunt tool, and I think it could easily be improved if they just put heart rate and power or something, or let you just play with the stats a bit on that screen, so you could really kind of work out what you're doing with Hill Splitter whenever you're on an uphill and how you're trying to pace that effort.
Okay, so Hill Splitter is another big feature and a kind of standout feature for the Grit X. Now, in my experience, in those very kind of focused hill training sessions, it didn't quite work for me all the time. It didn't maybe pick up or recognise some of the kind of ascents and descents, in those sessions. And I think it's a little bit half baked at the moment, and it's not. I don't think it's that massively useful. I think it could evolve to be more useful as a feature, but as it stands right now, Hill Splitter is kind of potentially could be a really great feature with the Grit X. I'm interested to see how Polar can improve it to make it a more useful feature for runners.
So while I am a really big fan of Polar's kind of nightly recharge sleep tracking, which I think is more detailed and accurate than you get on most sports watches, it completely went off the rails for me with the Grit in the final kind of 2 weeks I was wearing it. I don't think I had one night where it was tracked accurately. It would often miss my bedtime by a couple of hours, so I'd only get half a night's sleep, and sometimes about half the time it didn't bother to track anything at all, even though I was wearing it in the exact same way I had been in the early kind of weeks when the watch was doing a decent job of tracking my sleep. I've got a baby in the house, so I'm pretty hyper aware of my sleep in general, so it was a bit of a shame because that kind of completely throws out the reading you get the next day, and obviously linked features like FitSpark. So yeah, I would say although this is a very good feature, sometimes it actually goes off the rails, and in which case you're going to start ignoring it and taking the watch off at night, which is what I did.
So sports watches are, and brands that are making sports watches are paying more attention to sleep and what that means for kind of recovery, in between, your running and whatever else you're doing. And Polar probably offers the most, insightful, rich kind of metrics, to do with that. And in terms of accuracy, I was testing it against Fenix 6 on my wrist, and then I had the Withings sleep analyzer, which is a mat that lies down in underneath your mattress, and has generally produced the most reliable results for me for sleep tracking. The Polar in comparison was the closest in terms of the core metrics in comparison to Fenix, which I think is a little bit off generally, Garmin sleep tracking. Once you get to grips with what that sleep information means, and what and how Polar is using it, it is really useful. It can just feel a bit overwhelming to get to grips with it initially, but if you spend some time getting to know what those metrics mean, they're really nice to have. And on the Grit X, I found it generally, not perfect, but generally pretty, reliable in terms of those key sleep metrics, and yeah, solid enough on that front.
So I think FitSpark's a really kind of neat feature that Polar has introduced on a few of its watches, where basically every day you kind of get some workouts recommended for what you should be doing based on how well you've recovered overnight, based on the Polar sleep tracking. Generally, these are pretty good. So you get kind of a cardio workout, a couple of options, a couple of strength options, and then there are supportive workouts that kind of work your core or do some stretching, that kind of thing. And if you do one of the cardio workouts, you'll often then be recommended a supportive workout as well. So it's kind of a series of things that you can all be followed from the watch, and with the cardio you can do any sport for them, so they're all kind of based on heart rate training. Now, I think basically these are pretty good workouts. Like, you could, if you just followed what the Grit X told you to do, or the other Polar watches, you'd be pretty fit, I think. And you'd also do a very good job of all your supportive work, which a lot of people don't. I myself, as a runner, am pretty bad at that kind of thing. However, I think this is probably more aimed at the Polar Ignites crowd, that kind of sub 200 kind of fitness watch thing. It's more at the beginner athlete. Like if you're a runner who's very keen on training for an event, you probably already have a training plan in mind, and this wouldn't replace that. So for example, I'm training for a marathon. I would probably ignore all the cardio workouts on FitSpark, as good as they might be, because I have my training plan in place. But I would still say, if that's you, you should look at some of the supportive work. I know I could always do a bit more core work, and some of the strength workouts will help as well. So there's a little bit of everything there. And generally, they're pretty smart workouts, and it's very clearly explained on the watch. It's a pretty neat feature, but probably more aimed at kind of just beginner general fitness types than kind of pure runners.
So there really is a lot to like about this watch, not least the price. Now it's going to draw inevitable comparisons with the top of the range Garmin Fenix 6, just because it's sort of been pitched as an outdoor kind of trail running watch. But it actually sits between the scrum of watches that you get around £250 to £300, and there's really kind of top dog watches of the Garmin Fenix 6 and the Forerunner 945. And it sits neatly between that bracket. And actually, what I think here is if you're a beginner trail runner, or you're an occasional trail runner, or you're somebody who actually ventures from marathon to trail from time to time, this is a watch that could be really interesting, good value for the price. So although it's being touted as a trail ultra kind of outdoor watch, it's also actually a decent marathon and general running watch too. There's quite a lot of features there that are applicable for those people. It's really quite a close feature match to the Polar Vantage V. And actually it's a little bit of a shame that Polar haven't sort of sent some of those features back down to those people who bought the Vantage V. I mean, if you're really serious about recovery, the Recovery Pro feature that you get on a Polar Vantage V might make that a better option than the Grit X, and it's a shame that it hasn't come upwards.
So when it comes to the verdict, the Polar Grit X I think is a really, really good outdoorsy watch. I think it's a really nice new option to have in the kind of pantheon of running watches out there that sits in between those kind of mid-range 250, 300 pound watches that are probably more aimed at road running, and then the kind of top dogs, the Garmin Fenix 6 and the Forerunner 945. This is, £380. It's a lot cheaper than those top end Garmins, which are, I do think, far better watches, but this is another great option to have if you don't want to spend 500, 600 quid on a watch. So in terms of my verdict personally, so I'm a road runner, I'm usually training for marathons. So basically it's whether there's enough here to make me upgrade from something like the Forerunner 245, the Chorus Apex, those kind of £250 watches, even the Polar Vantage M. And for me, there probably isn't. Like, I probably won't use the Komoot turn by turn compared to the breadcrumb navigation you get on a £250 watch. It's not enough of an improvement to make me spend the extra money. The fueling feature is really good, I think, but if you're just doing marathons, I think generally you know the nutrition you need, and also you're not kind of changing your effort that much on the day. You're kind of usually on a fairly flat road course. You're not going up a mountain and coming back down. You don't need to adjust your fueling strategy for that kind of thing. You just take your gels on the kind of mile 5, mile 10, mile 15. So that is enough for me to upgrade. The kind of 40-hour battery life, is great, but again, I don't need that. And I would say that, you get a kind of weaker use out of something like the Forerunner 245, longer out of the Chorus Apex. So I do think it's a watch that's very much aimed at those outdoorsy people. And I think if you're a road runner, you're probably going to find better value just by sticking in the mid-range. Like I say, the Forerunner 245 is kind of the standout all-round running watch. But if you are really worried about your fueling in particular, I do think that's the really great feature on this watch that might be worth upgrading for, especially if it comes down in price. But yeah, it's a really good watch with quite a nice little, it sits quite nicely in the kind of range of watches out there. If you don't want to spend big on a Fenix or a Forerunner 945, this is another good option.
Okay, so should you buy the Grit X? I think it's a really solid option. At the point, at the price point that it's at. I didn't have any real major issues from the core running experience. In terms of those newer features, I think there's work to be done there. I think Fuelwise is a standout feature, and I can't wait to see how that kind of evolves. But yeah, generally a solid running watch. I think it's going to be a good outdoor running watch. It's a shame the navigation isn't a little bit more robust and refined in terms of how that works, but it does work. And if you're looking at what else is around this price and what else you can get, there's not a lot around it. If you want a kind of pure running experience, you can probably get pay less and get that. But if you're looking for a bit more in terms of venturing outdoors, hitting those trails, but also having something generally for road running as well and general running. It's a good option. Great for the price, and I think more polished watch than the Vantage V was in terms of my experience with that watch. And I think Polo have done a lot more here. Those features, I hope that I've kind of highlighted, I hope that they can work on, and that will make this an even kind of better watch to use for running.
Overall, we're actually really impressed with the Grit X. It delivers a great experience for the price. It sits significantly lower than something like the Fenix 6 series. It's not as good as that watch, but for the price it actually delivers a really good experience and is a great second option if you're not happy to pay that much money for an outdoor watch. For value, it's more expensive than the Garmin Instinct or the Chorus Apex, but you probably do get a lot more from this watch, so if you're happy to pay a bit more, then it may be worth the investment over those two. For outdoor people, it does a great job. It hasn't got the navigation features that you might find on something like the Fenix 6, but it's got enough to do the job when you're out there, and actually delivers a really nice experience. And having said that, it isn't really just an outdoor watch. The build, the size, and the way it works is very similar to some of the earlier Polar watches, which are actually designed more for road running and fitness. There's not a massive difference in terms of the weight and how it works, so it delivers excellently as just an all-round fitness watch. For me, I really enjoyed wearing this. When I first started wearing it, I wasn't too sure because I'd been wearing the Fenix 6, so comparisons are obviously going to occur, but having worn this for 3 or 4 weeks, I've really enjoyed wearing it, and I think it's a great option. If I was looking for a mid to higher level outdoor watch, or even just running watch, this is a really nice option. I've had no issues really with it. I think it is a really nice interface. I think it looks great, and I would say it's a really nice option if you're looking for just an all-round fitness watch that's got a bit of everything in, and hopefully we'll see a lot more updates being made to the firmware over the next few months to start fixing some of those issues like we found with Hill Splitter. So there you have it, all 4 run testers putting the new Polar Grit X through its paces and giving you our view across everything we could test on the watch. If you want to find out more about watches, head over to the channel because we've got more videos on various products that are available, including our full guide on the best running watches out there. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click that little bell icon, and we'll see you next time. Catch you later.